Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Tunde. Hello, everybody who follow us in this live stream. My name is Kasia Tusz, and I will host this conversation. And before I will introduce Tunde, a short general introduction where we are. So we do this conversation in the framework of the International Summer School as a part of Atlas of Transitions Biennale 2020. And this Biennale is promoted by Emilia-Romagna Teatro Fondazione, Department of Sociology and Business Law of the University of Bologna, and Cantinieri Medici. And it is a series of talks featuring international scholars, activists, curators, and artists. You can follow all conversations on Facebook and YouTube every day up till 20th of June. Each talk lasts 1 hour, and we will try to split it into 2 parts so that we will include questions that are posed in live chat box. So now this is our second dialogue today, and I have a pleasure to introduce our guest, Tunde Adefioye. Tunde is a performing arts dramaturg and lecturer. He's a Nigerian American based in Belgium. He co-founded the youth platform Urban Woerden in Leuven and was awarded the prize for cultural education by the Flemish government. In 2016, he began working as a city dramaturg as a part of Michal de Kock team at KVS in Brussels. It's a Royal Flemish Theatre in Brussels. He has done dramaturgy for many projects, including Malcolm X and Not My Paradise. In the recent years, he has been delivering lectures and speeches, among the other, at the 2018 ITM plenary meeting in Porto, at the Wales Arts International's conference, at the European Theatre Convention meeting in Dresden. In 2019, he made his directorial debut with Contact Theatre Manchester with the piece Old Tools greater than new masters doesn't equal new futures. Additionally, he's a lecturer of cultural criticism and US popular Black visual culture at St. Lucas Antwerp Art College. Welcome, Tunde.
Thank you, Kasia, for that introduction.
This is, of course, not your whole curriculum and not your whole
Luckily
experience.
not. Luckily not. Luckily not. I didn't know it was going to be that long. But yeah, that's what they asked me for, so I just sent it. So
yes, we are very correct. So yeah, I was thinking a lot how to navigate this conversation and how to stick to the topic that is announced. So the topic of Black dramaturgy. But my first question is just a general question about the state of your spirit. Where are you? Where are you at this moment when we witness Black Lives Matters demonstrations all over the world, when we are updated all the time about new violent events, new killings, new horrible tragic deaths of Black people in America, and at the same moment we are both in Belgium. That is apparently re-encountering its shameful history of colonization of Congo. And there is a lot of discussion in mainstream media on surface, let's say, that resonates, and yeah, do you think that it's a time to say complicated things more than ever, or you think that it's another image of a history that repeats itself, and it's this yeah, to what degree it's this moment is really exceptional, and how is your personal yeah, feeling about this?
Yeah, yeah, thanks for the first part of that question, which was um, how is my spirit? I didn't expect that question actually, but I should have known better. I should have known better. I mean, I'm tired. I'm just tired, literally and figuratively. Partly because well, I'll start with the figuratively. Figuratively, I'm tired because this is not the first time that I'm uh, this is not the first time, even this year alone, that a a uh, a death killing, sorry, a murder of a black body is um, being spread all over the news, all over social media, um, and it's really tiring. And every time I see another person getting killed, somehow, some way, it has a very kind of emotionally draining impact on me. Um, but this time around, I remember I was just talking to my friend who happens to be from Iran before this, and I was telling her that what happened on that Wednesday when I heard about because I heard about George Floyd's killing on a Wednesday, the week that it happened. Um, I remember just thinking, damn, like damn, seeing this, and then the whole thing about, I didn't see the whole video, and I don't want to see the whole video, at least not now. I don't know if I don't know if my spirit of my soul can handle it, but I also don't know if that's just a privilege thing. But I don't want to, I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to keep on revisiting that triggering traumatic, experience that is not new. Ironically or not, or ironically, his last words, or one of his last words, was "I can't breathe." You know, which is of course not new. Eric Garner, said that a few years ago, in Staten Island, when he was, also being pretty much sat on by police officers, for selling loose cigarettes, you know. And like, if you don't mind me saying, like, part of what was kind of something about these two killings is the fact that both of them, you know, George Floyd for $20 for uh, using a fake $20, and Eric Garner for selling loose cigarettes. Both of them point to this very real reality of you know um, injustice, economic injustice specifically, because we don't talk enough about that, right? We talk a lot about, as we should, the blackness aspect, which is really important. But when you listen to people like Angela Davis, and of course Kimberly Crenshaw, but definitely Angela Davis, they're always reminding us about the economic aspect, how these points intersect, and how these points have a real damaging impact on, black bodies, brown bodies, Native American, indigenous bodies, bodies of colors, bodies of color in the U.S. It's the aspect of their bodies being racialized, and this kind of economic injustice that they're living in, that is really makes it such a hard thing to witness, hard reality to witness. but you asked me that question, so my spirit is tired, but I'm just tired in general because this week, since 2 weeks ago, I've been involved in this, trying to see how I can get involved here, so I've been helping out with a new sort of, kind of what you could call, a movement of people who are really on the ground trying to change things, mostly young people, which is the most, I guess you could say heartening thing about it, like these young folks, younger than I am, they're not waiting around for anyone else to organize for them, kind of in vain of the, Black Lives Matter, people like Patrice Cullors and Opel Tometi and Alicia Garza, they're saying, what, we're going to do this, and we're not. Most of them, I should say, most of them are not interested in, uh, being popular or having their faces in the newspaper. They're really interested in how are we going to change, how are we going to make sure that this revolution really happens, because they've heard from their parents, their grandparents, about how, Belgium or in Holland that things were talked about, and people did things, but, it unfortunately hasn't come to a point where real revolutionary change has taken place, in a place like Belgium. So anyways, basically, I'm tired literally just because I've been, helping out with that, and at the same time, of course, this is a cultural, panel. So I've been back. I'm back. I'm one of the fortunate ones to be back at work after lockdown. So we started again in the studio with Moya Michael and the Colored Swans, Harriet's Remix crew. We started back in the studio also 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago was, I guess, the pinnacle of my my month so far, you could say, I guess, or this post-corona reality, I guess you could say.
And as a person who can embrace two perspectives, a perspective of the citizen of the US, a person born there, and I don't know when did you leave exactly, but I assume that the most part of your youth and early young adult life was spent there. And a person who is in Europe, who has been in Europe for many years, in Belgium, how many years? 13 or more?
I've been here since 2007. Yeah.
Okay, 13.
Yeah, 13. Yeah.
So I'm wondering what is this double perspective? What is the comparison that you could have a kind of double take? And what is also the sense of belonging or not belonging in Belgium? This is a question that connects with further questions about dramaturgy, but just to understand how do you position yourself in the light of that current situation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, your kind of first question was kind of in terms of belonging, or and then oh, sorry, I don't remember which way it went, but also you asked the question about compare. How would I compare? So it's something, of course, that I've done a lot in my head, especially because of the reality. When Obama got elected, I was here, in 2008, when he went into office, I was here, and so that is a different sort of reality, being here. And I remember thinking then, I wrote this little kind of article that I don't think anyone read, But I remember asking the question, is Europe ready for Obama? You know, um, and what you see is that uh, Europe, especially Western continental Europe, I don't want to speak too much about England because England is sometimes, or England, yeah, England, and maybe the UK as a whole is sometimes a little different, um, but um, but what I can say about Western continental Europe is that they have spent so much time building up this facade of progressiveness, and that facade of progressiveness is exactly why we are in the place that we are now. What you recognize, what you realize is that I can't take away from the fact that there are definitely progressive things about being in Europe. That's partly why I'm here. Of course, the social welfare state. Of course, when you look at education, when you look at the fact that people are able to stay healthy. When you look at the immigration or migration policies of countries like Sweden. You see progressiveness when you look at, for example, Holland, and the fact that like smoking marijuana was hardly ever a big deal. But also interesting about Holland is that their rates of incarceration, their rates of putting people in prison has also gone down, actually. Um, uh, in fact, so much so that they rent their prison space to Belgium. You know, Basically, I use all these examples just to talk about it's hard to, of course, talk about Europe as a whole because there's so much variation. But each country, what is interesting about each country is that they have the ability to hide behind this facade of progressiveness, this facade of progressiveness that does not allow them to face this issue of what happens to the black and brown people in your communities. What happens to those individuals that are racialized based on their religion. That I always use this quote all the time. That's why I remember it. Stuart Hall talks about how it's no longer about how black you are. It's not that racisms are no longer based on just genetic racisms, but more on cultural racisms. So that it's not about no longer about who are the blacks, but who are the British, meaning how British can you be? And then when you look at a place like France, when with the whole passing of the niqab law, or sorry, the burkini law, in passing that law, it was asking how French can you be? When you look at Belgium, the same thing. Like the fact that people in Antwerp, women wearing hijabs in Antwerp cannot work, for the local kind of government. If they're wearing a hijab, they can only have a back office role. Students going into the schools have to take off their hijab. So basically, what I'm saying is that this facade has, up until this point, has allowed Europe to kind of uh, uh, in the eyes of the rest of the world, seem like this place that is still kind of desirable, a place to migrate to, a place where, freedoms will be experienced. And indeed, like certain freedoms are experienced. But when you look at, what is happening in suburbs, whether it's the suburbs around Paris, whether it's the suburbs in Stockholm, whether it's the suburbs, whether it's Belmar, just a little bit outside of Amsterdam, what you see is that you have the same type of, you know, um, uh, uh, kettling, you know, kettling of people, where people are grouped, because everyone always likes to talk about how segregated U.S. cities are, which I give it to them, it is. But when you look at the suburbs here in Europe, you see just how segregated Europe is, actually. You see just how, based on the fact that a lot of people, of African descent, a lot of people who happen to be Muslim living in these suburbs sometimes, are not getting the same type of services as their, counterparts in, other parts of the greater society, so that you have a situation in Brussels, for example, where, one out of, you know, I might be wrong. It's either 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 5. I always get it wrong. But let's say let's be generous, okay? Let's be generous and say 1 out of 5 young Moroccans are living in poverty. In a progressive society that, prides itself on this progressiveness, this welfare state. There is no way that these young people should be living in poverty. Because what happens when you're living in poverty is that you're hungry, you can't focus in school, you're trying to help out your parents, and that means sometimes, having to engage in quote unquote criminal actions to feed yourself and feed your family. So basically, when you ask me to compare, it's hard to really kind of pinpoint a comparison, and I try not to do that if possible these days. Although I just did it on Sunday on the BBC, but it's hard to do that because as you know, of course, there are varied history in Europe, continental Western Europe, and the history of the U.S. But like I like to say these days, thanks to the work that Ibram Kendi has done and stamped from the beginning, what I like to say is that, what happened is that the seed of racism was planted by Gomes de Zurara in Portugal, in the 1400s, when he was writing about Henry the Navigator and all these black people that he brought together, black people that were, for I think one of the first times, sold at a auction for enslaved people, in Lagos, Portugal, But so the seeds of racisms were planted here in continental Europe, and then it was transported across the Atlantic into, what was then, what then became the U.S., or the Americas, and then it mutated. And when you look at places like the U.S., when you look at places like Brazil, the mutation and the impact that this racism has on especially black people, but indigenous folks in Brazil, in the Amazon, the impact that it has on indigenous people, on reservations in the US is just so detrimental, and so inhumane. But nevertheless, what you see in Europe is that it has this sort of racisms that has been able to kind of work itself into institutions that then exclude people, that continue to exclude people, because, when you ask me for the comparison, because in the US, at least you can have, somebody, for better or for worse, like there's a lot of criticisms to be given about Obama's policies and especially what he did, in places like Yemen, and in places like Afghanistan. There are criticisms to be given, but at least in the U.S., you can have a black person say, "I want to aspire to become a president." In Europe, in continental Western Europe, that is still not the case. That is still not the case. And I don't want to hear, because what people like to say all the time, and I always say this, what people always like to say is, oh, but, the migration to Europe is so, new, or the migration to these countries are new. I mean, Italians didn't come to, Belgium to work in the mines until, what, the 50s and the 60s. The Moroccans didn't come to work in the mines in Limburg in Belgium until the 50s and 60s. But I don't want to hear that nonsense, because the reality is, like, people of color have been here, first of all, and secondly, if these European countries are, or societies are, as progressive as they say they are, as they claim they are, then the factor of the variable of time should not be playing a role in how people see their own dreams and see their own aspiration in relation to the society that they live in. You see. So yeah, that's all I can say about the comparison. But to answer your question, and please stop me whenever you want to, because I'll just keep on going. But to answer your question about belonging.
Yeah, I will interrupt because you are drinking tea now. So belonging, let's take this thing of belonging and let's join it with your function or your your work at KWS as a dramaturg. And this function is called City Dramaturg. So you mentioned Brussels, and there is a lot of racism in Brussels, as we know. Just to mention a recent tragic incident that during lockdown in Molenbeek, a policeman shot a young guy, a teenager of migrant roots because he was trying to avoid control related to measures. Anyhow, it was not justified in any way what police did. So there were also riots in Molenbeek afterwards. There's a lot of tension in the city. So my question is, how did you? What was your starting point to define yourself as a city dramaturg in Brussels, and how does belonging or not belonging thing evolving in that context of your work?
Yeah. So first of all, I should say that the idea of the city dramaturg initially came from Curado Salinas. And then what we did is that there were 3 city dramaturgs, and what we tried to do is try to interpret it for ourselves. But that question of belonging is a very good one, actually, right now for me, because like I told you, Kasha, I'm leaving the KWS, most likely, depending on contracts and stuff like that, I'll be leaving at the end of June, or maybe in September, at the end of September, when Colored Swan, Moyamako's Colored Swan premieres, right? But what I could say about belonging in terms of the institution is that what I realized is that as myself, as a person, as someone who's critical, as someone who's moody sometimes, as someone who just can't put up with sometimes the way whiteness kind of seeps into the different corners and seeps into the different kind of fabric of a institution. As someone who cannot stand that, it was hard for me to ever feel like I belonged in the KWS, and it was hard for me to ever feel like I belong in general to the cultural sector in Belgium, but definitely, let's say Flanders, it was hard for me to feel like I belonged, because as much as I like to joke, with technicians and whatever, it wasn't possible to feel like, the microaggressions that took place in this institution, you know, was okay. The microaggressions that took place in the sector was okay. I'll give you an example, and then I'll go to your broader question about the city of Brussels. But I just don't want to give the wrong impression that everything is roses within this, white institution that's built on, colonial bureaucracy, right? That's built on, stolen, looted, rubber from the Congo. But before I go, I talk about the city. I wanted to talk about the institution because the reality is that that institution is, the foundation of that institution, to say it like others have said it before, the foundation of that institution is built on white supremacy, right? So if the foundation of that institution is built on white supremacy, how am I, as someone who kind of unapologetically, to take from Nina Simone's words, who unapologetically, you know, identifies as Black politically, and as a Black person, it's hard to exist within the context of that building, So let's say that. And then I was going to say this about the sector, like I first had, I don't want to be petty now, but I think it might be interesting to kind of get a context, right? But I had a situation. I think it's more than 2 years ago when I first started at the KVS. There was this, well-known theater maker, kind of TV actor who also happens to be a lecturer at the same college that I was working at in Leuven. Because I was giving guest lectures there also in the theater department, and he came to, he had a show that he presented at the KVS. So I walk in because, that night I was the one that was supposed to kind of be there as a sort of face of the institution, make sure, nothing goes wrong, make sure if there's an emergency, I call the right numbers. So I come in before the show, and it's dark, of course, and he sees me, while he's rehearsing, and we kind of like exchange looks, but we don't say anything because he's rehearsing. 2 days later, after that, or 3 days later, after that weekend, he comes up to the fourth floor where our offices are, and he's like, "Oh, who are you? Do you work here?" And I'm in my office that I share with my two other colleagues from the city dramaturg. So, but that's not it, right? Then he has an interview on Bruce, which is this local Brussels newspaper, and he said, as a progressive white person, this is what he said, right? He said, we have definitely come far. I'm paraphrasing, of course. We've come far because, if you look at KVS now, like I was there, presenting my show, and I saw this, person who, was big and, Black, and I thought he was a security guard, only to find out that he was a city dramaturg. This is what a white man who has a lot of privilege and power within the cultural sector said in a progressive way in a newspaper about me. You see, so that's, that belonging has never really happened in the sector. Now let's go to your original question about belonging in the society. Like I have to say, like I've had a lot of privileges. I've had a lot of privileges, and what I always told people in the beginning of my term at the KVS in 2016 is, like I always ask the question, why me? Why me? I don't speak French. I get by with my Dutch. Like you have people in Molenbeek, in Matonge, in different neighborhoods in Antwerp who, in fact, one of my interns, Haja, she speaks French, Dutch, English, and Arabic, and smart as sharp as I don't know what. Why me and why not this individual who happens to be a woman of Moroccan descent? And you know what I always say? I always say that me, because my English, the way I speak English, the way I can slang it a little bit, this performativity of blackness has been really attractive to, Europeans at large, white Europeans at large, but especially those in the cultural sector, because kind of the US is more attractive, to kind of their goal. So basically, in terms of belonging, like, I don't know, I can't say I've ever felt like belonging in the society, but what I can say is that, however I might feel, I have privilege, right? The kids who you're talking about, or the individuals that you're talking about, like who live in places like Molenbeek or whatever, they don't have that privilege, And I'll be honest with you, like, after the bombing in 2016, like, that's when we started working at the KVS, and I asked myself, how are these kids of color, who might not go to the KVS, how will they benefit from my being at the KVS? And I always thought, oh, indirectly, they will benefit. But you know what? After all these years, and especially after what I saw late last year, also involving police violence, so I thought, oh, 2016, I was doing a good job. 2017, I was critical. I wrote this, piece that everyone was, a lot of people were reading, called A Sea of White People, 2018, things happened, you know, and then 2019, I'm like reflecting on what have I done here? What has our impact been? Especially because, I'm coming up from the metro station, and I see this was at the end of 2019, if I'm not mistaken. I see a group of police, like 10 or 15 of them, circling teenagers of color, kids that just came from school. One of them, he looked, I mean, I'm sure he probably was 13, but he looked like he was 10. And he looked scared as nobody's business, you know? So when I saw this, I started, like I was asking myself, like, what is the point of the work that we're doing? Especially when, like I asked questions of the police, and one of the police got really aggressive with me and actually pushed me. Sorry, I'm not good with meters or whatever. He pushed me like, 10 feet away from the incident, saying that I need to get away from here. I need to stop asking questions. And then later you had another two policemen who then, kind of forced me up the escalator. So when I see this, I'm like, is the job that we are doing as city dramaturg really serving the city? Or maybe better, what part of the city is it really serving? Right? So, that doesn't answer your question, Kasha, and I'm sorry, but that's what is on my mind right now, because I'm like, what, especially now with the whole Black Lives Matter and things like that, especially now when Leopold's statue is being taken down in Antwerp and people are trying to take it down in Brussels, we need to get away from these damn fancy terms, whatever. And I'm all about theorizing and reading, books. I'm all about that. But you know what? We're failing. We're failing as a cultural institution, KVS. We're failing as a cultural sector. It's not enough to just have people of color on stage. When people at large, when people of color at large, people of Congolese descent, people of Moroccan descent, people of Ghanaian descent, do not feel like they have a real stake in larger society. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer your question maybe the way you wanted me to, but I just feel so I just feel like, these institutions are failing the society, that they were kind of basically, entrusted with engaging. We're not engaging the people that need to be engaged the way they need to be engaged. We're not, and I always say this, and this is not my saying, of course, we're not putting our privilege on the line enough.
Mhm.
Like we sell enough tickets, we have this fancy sort of diversity coat that we can, put out, like people love to talk about how diverse the KVS is. And yes, the KVS, I won't take away from the KVS. The KVS has done a relatively good job, especially when you compare it to other institutions in Belgium. They've done a relatively good job in terms of having uh, theater makers of color making work and putting their work on stage. But the truth is, that is not enough. That now, sorry, that now in 2020 does not cut it anymore. We need to stop with the window dressing, basically.
So what can have like a deep, long-lasting impact on changing these invisible internal rules within the cultural sector, which per definition should be the most progressive, open-minded, self-critical. In the cultural field, that's my sensation, there's a lot of declared opposition against racism, discrimination, exclusion. There's a lot of discourse about this, and none of us would call himself a racist, but there's so much moments or schemes or behaviors that are racist, and this applies to individuals, organizations, even small and big institutions. So my question is where we should focus our attention. You've been busy with language, with text a lot, as a dramaturg, but you mentioned slam. You founded this collective in Leuven, Urban Woorden, with young people, and this organization offers a lot when it comes to text. So yeah, how maybe we should focus on profound change of our rhetoric and language and vocabulary that we use when we talk about discrimination, because maybe there's too much imposing, maybe there's too much words that are said on behalf instead of words that are generated by those who are discriminated. What is your position? After these few years with KVS, in terms of in the context of language, the power of language. And meanwhile, there's a question from our audience connected with this. So the question is about tactics of communicating and reciprocity that you used as a city dramaturg. So it's again about the language, about tools to communicate what you are doing and what you can offer.
Mm-hmm. Tactics of communication and reciprocity. Reciprocity is a very good word, but the question, I guess, would be reciprocity for who? So it's hard to answer that question. Like I said, I mean, I'll say it again. Like there's, as I see it right now, there's no real reciprocity for the type of labor, the type of labor that people of color are asked to do every single day. emotional labor, intellectual labor, the type of labor that they're asked to do and perform every single day for the ruling class. There is not enough reciprocity. In fact, just today I received a letter that was signed by 600 artists and makers, filmmakers of color from Holland, talking exactly about this. The reciprocity does not exist. Whether it's, the KVS, who is, at the top of the class in terms of this question of diversity, um, um, or if it's another institution, reciprocity is not existing the way it needs to exist. Reciprocity should include this very important part of the equation, which is power. We need to talk about power. Tactics of communication, language as power is important. But I can't really talk about tactics of communication because then I'm also complicit, which I've been all these years. I'm complicit in helping the institution drive its kind of diversity machine that allows it to bring in new funding, from the government. So I don't want to, focus on tactics of communication because tactics of communication is not going to help us through this moment. Tactics of communication is not going to help us through this moment, especially when you look at coronavirus. The coronavirus, definitely in the US, I think you all know this, has impacted Black and brown people more than anything. The coronavirus also in I know this about England, they've also been kind of creating these charts that are showing how impacted, Southeast Asians are, due to corona. So tactics of communication is not going to help us through this moment. What cultural institutions need to do if they really want to be part of this discussion right now is to think about maybe the other part, reciprocity. What does real reciprocity look like? Like, stop asking, whether it's in a subtle type of ask or in an aggressive sort of ask, stop asking people of color to give you their information for free. Stop asking people of color to give you their labor for free, because I'm not the only one that's tired, and I've had a relatively privileged life, right? There's a lot of people that are just tired, and what really needs to change is that equation of power. If we, especially in the cultural institution, in the cultural sector, can't talk about how we, um, first of all, decentralize power, in the work that we do, but we also need to talk about how we make space for other people to use that power in how they see it and how they shape it, to use that power to make change and to create, new art, new culture that is really speaking from their cultural heritage, their way of being, instead of this kind of, imposition that happens with a lot of cultural, um, um, uh, actors. Like, institutions are always imposing what they expect of, people living in poverty. They're always imposing, these nice projects on, people of color. They're always imposing these nice projects on, new refugees into the country or into the society. How about, instead of imposing ourselves, how about we create real space and we give real power and we give real resources for people to use their cultural background to really transform this time that we're living in?
I have a question related to this from Christina from our chat box. Do you think storytelling narratives can help give immigrants, a different image to the locals, especially in Europe? I'm particularly interested in engaging in music activities.
What was that? Storytelling what? Narratives?
Yes, storytelling narratives.
Yeah, I mean, Christina, is it Christina?
Yes.
I mean, like, I've heard, that's cool that you want to engage in storytelling narrative and you want to engage using music, to change the way the society looks at, refugees and immigrants, that's cool, I guess, but it's not enough. You know why it's not enough? Like you said, Kasha, like urban wording, I started with some young people in 2009, 2010, you know, 2009, 2010. And the way that the Flemish society, and I would say Belgian society at large, the way the Flemish society sees not even migrants or refugees, but how they see second generation individuals still has not changed for a large extent. So, of course, storytelling narratives can work, but I think, once again, Christina, I think what needs to happen is, you know, create real space for these individuals who are coming into the country to access power. You, Christina, and everyone else need to be the portal in a way in terms of being a true accomplice, not an ally. An ally is good. An ally is the first step. And I would say, Christina, based on what you're saying, maybe you might be an ally. But instead of just being an ally, you need to be a real accomplice. Real accomplices are those individuals that you see now in the streets in the US, you know, mostly white folks who are saying Black Lives Matter. That's a real accomplice. Real accomplices are those individuals, white folks, you know, not to give them all the credit, but who are stepping in the way of, you know, rubber bullets so that other people, mostly people of color, can be safe. You know, although people of color still aren't being, you know, Black people especially aren't safe in these circumstances. But basically what I'm trying to say is that I'm using that example just to say that we need to focus on how do we use our privilege to be accomplices of these, you know, of individuals who might not be as privileged as us. And that means, you know, really putting our privilege on the line. That means, you know, really being innovative about what kind of projects we're doing and how we're, you know, you can use storytelling narrative, that's cool, but what type of power do these individuals that you're trying to have a positive image of, what kind of power do they have and what kind of say do they have in the project that you're creating, Christina?
And getting back to these young people from urban Woerden, how do you see the impact that being active within this organization somehow changed their view, empowered them, or because probably you have some friends who grew up a bit and they are somewhere else than in 2009. So how do you see this also a kind of dramaturgy, I suppose, when it comes to a broadened horizon of their lives and a sense of subjectivity, a sense of freedom, or
I mean, you know, like I can either answer that question using a positive lens, or I can answer it using a negative lens, you know. And just to say that, you know, there are, of course, examples of young people that I'm, you know, still kind of see around and stuff. There are examples of young people on opposite sides of that scale, you know. First of all, I always tell people that, you know, urban wording was never about empowering. We weren't never about, or we tried not to be about the action of empowering young people. You know, what is important is creating a space for young people to empower themselves, you know, that's to facilitate their own transformation. But in terms of the impact, you know, like, of course, I've had, you know, some young people who have found their way to urban wording who've told me, like, hey, yo, Tunde, if it wasn't because of urban wording, I wouldn't be, you know, doing this filmmaking. You know, if it wasn't because you approached me in the park, I wouldn't be doing this and that. You know, it was because of urban wording that I got my first opportunity to do public speaking as a poet. Now I'm, you know, working in politics, you know, and now I'm studying law. So you have those. But you still have those individuals who, you know, are still living in situations where, in order to get by in life, in order to have enough food, they're selling weeds to survive. Do you understand me? They're selling weed to survive. So, I'm sure the urban wording has had some impact, but the truth is, Kasha, urban wording, first of all, never had the the type of respect that it deserved from the cultural sector, because it was mostly young people of color who were running this organization that was so new that they did not know what to do with it, and that killed the spirit. And yeah, I'll admit, there were times where I had no clue what was going on. I was disorganized, but that's when a real accomplice would be like, hey, your organization seems real, a little disorganized. How about we help you apply for financing? How about we apply for funding for you? How about we give you space to rehearse? That's what a real accomplice does. And luckily, we had some of those people. But unfortunately, we also had a lot of people who were just kind of stepping in our way. So basically, what I'm saying, back again to this power, urban wording did not have the power it needed to really kind of transform the lives of these young people. That's what I'm saying. Some people were impacted positively, but they did not have the impact. The urban wording did not have the power to really transform their lives.
Okay, now I switch more into Black dramaturgy and this idea
That's what this conversation was supposed to be about.
Yeah,
Sorry
and
about
also
that.
I have a few questions from the chat from people. So yeah, the question about your practice in collecting, archiving, recreating different stories and narratives that are not normative or counter narratives that are not present, as you called it, in the fabric, social and historical fabric of Europe. Mm-hmm. What is your practice here with especially with archives? There's a few questions about this.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've been fortunate to work on, with people like Sashli Golamalizadeh, who's a Iranian Belgian theater maker. Really kind of digging into this idea of her family personal archive. And using and looking at it within the framework of the Belgian context. How does one's family history, from a place like Iran, she came to Belgium, I think, when she was 4 or so. She left. She left after the revolution, right? Mm-hmm. How does that experience shape the kind of stories that's being presented in a white institution, right? And really is, like, I'll say this, like, her piece, Not My Paradise, for me was a really beautiful piece. But still, that power that she built into that piece was taken away by, once again, the power of language. That power that she built in that piece was taken away when critics wrote about how this was another piece about identity politics. If we don't, sorry, I'm diverging again from the archive question, but if we don't change how we, first of all, the lenses that we use to look at these pieces, we're always going to fail at trying to understand them, because this young woman put in so much time and effort archiving, right? Archiving her own personal family history, going to Tehran, 2 years before the piece, speaking with her aunts that, other family members haven't spoken to because they were criminal, putting her own self on the line to archive their stories, But all of this work from this woman, Iranian Belgian woman, all this work of archiving is totally cut down when a critic says, well, this is just this is just another story about identity politics. We'll give it 3 stars.
And have you ever engaged yourself as a city dramaturg, as somebody working in the institution, in trying to build a platform or make a project for critics or for dogs who write, but from the outside? Because
what did you say, dogs who lie? Did you say dogs who lie?
No, those who write from the outside.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, those who write from the outside.
Because my feeling is that we don't talk that often about critics or where the reflection is produced. No,
Yeah.
We very often focus on the projects and the content, and then there's a lot of frustration and
yeah. No, I mean, to answer your question real quickly, because I know we're running out of time. I can't believe it's been an hour already. Shoot.
We have still 8 minutes.
So to answer real quick, I wrote this article in Etc. magazine speaking exactly about this, actually, about critics, and calling out critics, in Etc. This was in 2000, must have been 2017 or so, But aside from that, you have, Recto Verso, the cultural magazine in Belgium, doing really important work of training new generations of critics, giving them the tools of learning about anti-racism, not just being non-racist, but being anti-racist, being decolonial, being intersectional. So Recto Verso is doing that work. So look at that. After an hour, I answered a question in just a few seconds. But I really like that question about archiving, because it's what's keeping me busy. And of course, this is what the talk was supposed to be about. But like, I'm tired. I haven't been sleeping, and it's been a lot. But so it's been all over the place. But whatever. But what is interesting to talk about in terms of the archive is that I'm really deeply interested in that. With the work that I did as a dramaturg in Malcolm X, that was what that was about, is digging into the archive about what Malcolm X was and what it means, what he means in Belgium. But now that I'm kind of making my exit out of KBS, I'm really looking at my own sort of personal archive as a person who is descended from enslaved people in the south of the U.S., but also as someone who is, half Nigerian. So I'm really interested in the archive. I'm really especially, thank you very much, whoever asked that question. I really love this now, because, one of the books that has kind of really impacted me a lot the last few months, I read it last year, was Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives. If you're into archives, collecting narratives, please read Wayward Lives. Like, that's a free gift I'm giving you, because I've been all over the place. So if I don't give you anything else today, that's one thing I want to give you. It's like Wayward Lives it'll change the way you look at the archive, because of the fact that she does this thing that W.E.B. Du Bois, the great Afro-American, sociologist of the 1900s, he kind of came up with this idea of fictive speculation. So she does this thing of fictive speculation to zoom in on the stories of those living in the tri-state area. So New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. In the early 1900s, people whose lives were only archived through their waywardness, through their vagrancies, through their criminality. So she transformed this so-called criminality to an understanding of what these Black women really were doing. These Black women, what she called, were rebels that were not understood. So that is really what I'm kind of trying to dig into right now, really looking at, I'm really, so if anyone is interested in like working on that with me, like looking at the archives of, this individual, Evina Jenkins, who, really was a real person who lived in, who passed away not too long ago, and kind of her family history tied to the Jenkins plantation in Mississippi, because Jenkins is a Welsh name. So I'm really interested in who was this person, who were the Jenkins, you know, the Black Jenkins, the enslaved Jenkins, but also who were the women Jenkins, who were the enslavers of these, you know, Black Jenkins. You know, so I'm really interested in terms of our future projects, in terms of, you know, art, really digging into the archive, but also creating a fictiveness to stories that were pushed to the margins and are still pushed to the margins of our societies, you know, and we need those stories more than ever today.
And what are your plans for after the KVS conclusion? You last year you made your first show, yeah?
Yeah.
And yeah, what are your desires, plans?
Yeah.
Do you want to stay in Belgium, or?
That's a hard question. Did I already tell you this? I think I told you this. Yeah, I must have told you this. That's a hard question. I mean, you know, like I'm so, you know, that's another thing I was sharing today too. Like I'm sharing it a lot. I'm so jaded with the cultural sector, you know. Oh yeah, I was sharing it with Rosha Goan. If anyone does not know Rosha Goan what's the name of the arts admin in London? Like she's a powerful person, like not power in the way we see it, but really power in terms of really trying to change things. But anyways, I was telling her this morning, we were having a WhatsApp chat about the situation going on in London and how the subcultural sector, especially the queer cultural sector, are asking for real change. White institutions that are serving Black queer people who need to change their all white, you know, administration. Anyways, I was telling her about how I feel jaded about the cultural sector in Belgium, and I'm not really interested actually in working here, you know, because the same type of microaggression, the same type of, you know, pain gets relived again, where you have, you know, mostly white men who are dictating. They're dictating the playing field. You know, so I'm not really interested in that. I am, though, interested in doing research. You know, like I said about this project, you know, this fictive speculation project. I'm also interested in, you know, like real transformation. Like I'm interested in how are we going to, going back to what I said earlier, how are we going to really break from these institutions, whether it's culture, schools, the police? How do we break from these institutions in Europe that are built on colonial money, that are built on a colonial administration? How do we break from these institutions to create new institutions, or to create new spaces? They don't have to be institutions, to create new spaces that really pays attention to what Professor Gloria Wecker says, what she calls new meaning making. We really need to focus on creating new spaces, transformed spaces, in order to give enough space for these individuals to tell their own story, to give our society, meaning the European society, new ways of looking at itself.
Okay, I think it's a great, powerful conclusion, and a kind of inspiring sentence for all of us. Our time is over, although I think we could continue, and people are really engaged in our chat, and there's a lot of enthusiasm about what you are saying, but we need to stop now. So thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for engaging. Thank you, Kasia, for your patience.
Thank you, Tunde, and let's hope to meet soon.
Yeah, and thank you also, Pia Sandra, and the Summer School for having this platform.
Yes, this is the first day of the summer school. It lasts till 20th of June, so a lot of fascinating conversations ahead of us. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.